"Plant your seed in me," the giant Apache girl said to the lonely rancher. The wind whispered through the fields in the morning, carrying the scent of earth and grass, and at night the sky seemed to stretch forever, a blanket of stars so wide it made John feel both small and insignificant. Every morning he rose before the sun. There was always work to do. The horses needed feeding, the cattle had to be checked, and fences required mending. Though the work was hard, it was steady, and it gave John a sense of purpose. Still, no matter how much work he did, an emptiness lingered in his heart. He had friends in the nearest town, and people came and went through the ranch occasionally, but none stayed long. There were no close companions to share meals with, no laughter echoing through the wooden halls of his home. His life was predictable, safe, and silent. John had tried companionship before. In his younger years, he had courted a few women from the nearby town, but nothing had ever lasted. One left because the life of a rancher was too lonely, another because the isolation of the land made her restless. Over the years, John had learned to accept his solitude, but it was never easy. On quiet nights, when the wind rustled the leaves and the cattle slept, he often found himself thinking about what life might have been like with someone by his side, someone to share the small victories and the hard days, someone who would understand the rhythms of the land as he did. The ranch itself was a character in his life. The old wooden house had been built by his grandfather, sturdy and reliable, with creaking floors that told stories of generations past. Outside, the barn stood tall, sheltering horses and hay, while the pens held the cattle that sustained his livelihood. John had learned to read the weather by watching the clouds, to know the moods of his animals by their behavior, and to navigate the wide open spaces as if they were a second skin. Yet, all this familiarity brought little comfort when loneliness crept in. One afternoon, after tending to the cattle, John decided to ride out farther than usual. The sun was high, painting the plains in golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of dust and wildflowers. He guided his horse slowly across the dry earth, thinking about the routines of the day and the chores that awaited him back at the ranch. That was when he noticed something unusual. Footprints. Large, human footprints, unlike anything he had seen before. They were deep in the dirt, spaced widely, and they led toward a narrow canyon he had often avoided. It was a place where the land dipped suddenly, forming cliffs and shadows that seemed to hide secrets. John frowned, curiosity gnawing at him. He had always been cautious, knowing the land could be dangerous, but something about the footprints drew him closer. He followed the trail carefully, urging his horse forward while keeping his eyes on the ground. The canyon loomed ahead, its walls high and imposing. Sunlight barely touched the floor, leaving patches of shadow that shifted as the wind blew. As he rode deeper, the footprints became clearer, larger even than they had seemed at first. John felt a mixture of caution and fascination. He had always believed that the world was vast and full of surprises, but even he was unprepared for what he might find in the canyon's quiet depths. The sound of the horses' hooves echoed softly against the canyon walls. Birds flitted overhead, startled by the sudden movement. John slowed his horse, scanning the area carefully. That was when he saw her. A figure stood near a small stream that ran through the canyon. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen, taller than most people he had met, with a presence that seemed to command the space around her. Her hair was long and dark, flowing like the water of the stream, and her eyes held a depth that seemed to see right into him. John's heart quickened, not with fear but with wonder. The girl, sensing his gaze, turned to look at him, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. She introduced herself as Ayana. Her voice was calm, yet carried a strength that matched her appearance. She explained that she had been living in the canyon for many years, learning to survive in solitude, much like John had done on his ranch. She knew the land intimately, understanding its moods, its dangers, and its hidden beauty. John listened, captivated by her knowledge and her quiet confidence. It was clear she was different, not just in size, but in the way she moved through the world, confident, grounded and entirely at peace with herself. Over the next few hours, John and Ayanna talked as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. He shared stories of the ranch, of the cattle and horses, of the long days and the quiet nights. She listened with interest, occasionally adding her own stories of life in the canyon, how she found food, how she built shelters, and how she learned to respect the land that had become her home. Despite their different experiences, they found common ground. Both had lived lives shaped by isolation, both had learned to rely on themselves, and both understood the deep ache of loneliness that comes from living apart from others. As evening fell, the canyon glowed in the soft light of the setting sun. Shadows stretched long across the rocks, and the air cooled with the promise of night. John realized that he had not felt this alive in years. The presence of another human, someone who could understand the quiet struggles of life in isolation, stirred something within him. He felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that his solitude could be shared, that perhaps companionship was not beyond his reach. Yana, noticing the thoughtful look on his face, smiled gently. She spoke with an honesty that startled John, telling him that it was rare to find someone who could truly understand life on the margins of the world. Her words were simple, yet profound, and John felt a connection that went beyond mere friendship. There was a spark of something deeper, a recognition of shared experience and mutual respect. When it was time for him to return to the ranch, John felt a reluctance he had not expected. Leaving the canyon and the girl behind, he rode back across the plains with a mind full of thoughts and a heart feeling lighter than it had in years. He knew that this encounter was the beginning of something significant, though he could not yet understand its full implications. The world suddenly seemed larger, filled with possibilities, and the isolation that had weighed on him for so long felt slightly less oppressive. That night, as he sat by the fireplace in the old wooden house, John reflected on the day's events. He thought about the footprints in the dirt, the towering canyon, and the girl who had appeared from it. He realized that life still held surprises, and that even in the most solitary existence, connections could be found in unexpected places. The wind whispered outside, carrying the scents of earth and grass, and John felt a quiet anticipation for what was to come. In the days that followed, he found himself returning to the canyon whenever possible. Each visit brought new discoveries, conversations, and a growing sense of companionship. The canyon, once a place of mystery and caution, became a place of connection and possibility. And though John remained the same hard-working rancher, tending to cattle and fences, his heart had begun to change. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to hope, not just for survival, but for the warmth of friendship, understanding, and perhaps something more profound. After that first surprising encounter in the canyon, John Thompson found himself thinking about Ayanna constantly. There was something about her presence that lingered in his mind long after he had returned to his ranch. The vastness of the plains and the endless chores that filled his days could no longer distract him completely. He began to realize that he wanted to see her again, to learn more about her life, and perhaps, in some quiet way, to share his own. Days passed, and John found excuses to ride toward the canyon more often. Sometimes it was under the pretense of checking distant cattle, other times simply to enjoy the solitude of the ride. Each time he approached, he felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. What would she be doing? Would she even want to see him again? Yet, despite these thoughts, he pushed onward, driven by a curiosity he had not felt in years. The first time he saw her after that initial meeting, she was standing near the stream again, this time gathering plants and herbs that grew along the water's edge. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful, as she bent and reached to gather the leaves she needed. The sunlight caught in her dark hair, highlighting its rich color and the strength in her frame. John watched quietly from a distance, unsure if he should call out or approach. Iana noticed him almost immediately, though. She turned, her eyes meeting his with a calm certainty. There was no surprise in her gaze, only recognition. "You return often," she said, her voice carrying easily across the quiet canyon. Yes," John replied, dismounting carefully. "I find myself drawn this way. The canyon, it's different from the ranch. It feels alive." He had not mentioned it during their first meeting, yet she said it now as though she had always known. It was not frightening, but oddly comforting. There was an honesty in her demeanor, a straightforwardness that he had rarely encountered in anyone. Over the next few weeks, John and Ayanna began to spend more time together. Their meetings were simple at first, short conversations by the stream, sharing water or small meals he brought with him, exchanging stories about the land and the animals. But with each encounter, their connection grew stronger. John found himself laughing more, speaking more freely, and feeling a warmth he had long thought impossible in his solitary life. Yana shared her own story with him slowly in pieces. She had grown up near these lands, though not in the canyon itself. She had always been larger than the other children, stronger and taller, which made her different from a young age. Some admired her, but many did not understand her. Over time, she had learned that solitude offered freedom from judgment and cruelty. She had built a life in the canyon that was self-sufficient and independent, surviving through skill, knowledge, and an understanding of nature that John found impressive. John was fascinated. Here was a person who had faced challenges unlike any he had ever known, yet had grown resilient, confident, and self-reliant. She moved with a strength that reminded him of the horses he tended, powerful, graceful, and unafraid of the land around her. There was a rhythm to her movements, a harmony with nature that he could not help but admire. In return, John shared his own experiences, stories of the ranch, and the long years of solitude he had endured. He spoke of the chores that filled his days, the cattle he tended, and the quiet moments when the plains stretched endlessly under the sun. He told her about the nights he spent under the stars, imagining what it might be like to have someone beside him, someone to share the silence and the work. Yana listened without interruption, offering thoughtful nods and occasional questions that showed she was fully present. Over time, their conversations began to take on a deeper tone. They talked about hopes and fears, the longing for connection, and the desire to be understood. John realized that Ayanna, despite her strength, had also felt isolation and loneliness. She had learned to survive, but she had never truly known companionship. The canyon had been her home, but it was a solitary one. John's presence, steady and genuine, offered a new perspective, a possibility that life could be shared, not just endured. One evening, as the sun dipped below the canyon walls and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ayanna spoke with a boldness that caught John off guard. "I trust you, John," she said quietly, yet firmly. "It is rare to find someone who understands. You are honest, patient, and you see me as I am. I want to share my life with you, fully." He realized that she was offering him a trust few people would give, an invitation to be part of her world in a way that went beyond casual friendship. Jana continued, sensing his hesitation. "Loneliness can be heavy, John. It can weigh on your spirit and cloud your heart. I have carried it as you have, but I believe we can find something together, something worth sharing. I want you to be part of my life, and I hope you feel the same." And now, she was offering him the chance to step beyond the boundaries of his solitary existence and embrace a new chapter. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger. John found himself learning from her in ways he had never expected. She taught him about the plants in the canyon, their uses, their properties, and the subtle ways they could indicate changes in the weather. She showed him how to move quietly through the terrain, how to find shelter in hidden nooks, and how to respect the land in ways he had never considered. John, in turn, shared his knowledge of livestock, ranch work, and the practical skills that kept him alive and successful on the plains. Together, they discovered a rhythm in their interactions, a balance between his world and hers. They laughed at small mistakes, celebrated small successes, and learned to rely on each other's strengths. John began to notice how natural it felt to be around her, how easy it was to speak honestly, and how comforting her presence was in ways he had never experienced. Their connection also carried an emotional depth that went beyond shared knowledge or companionship. John noticed how Ayana's eyes seemed to understand his unspoken thoughts, how her presence brought a quiet calm to his restless mind, and how her confidence inspired him to see himself in a new light. He began to understand that their relationship was more than friendship. It was a meeting of souls shaped by solitude, resilience, and a longing for connection. One afternoon, as they sat by the stream and watched the sunlight dance on the water, Iana spoke again, this time more candidly. "John," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I have lived alone for a long time. I have been strong, independent, and capable. But there is a part of me that longs for companionship, for someone to share life with, not just survive alongside. I feel that with you." He reached out to her, placing a hand on hers, and felt the quiet pulse of trust and connection that had been growing between them. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon in shades of gold and amber, John understood that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He was no longer merely the lonely rancher tending to his land. He was a man who had found a kindred spirit, someone who could share his joys, his struggles, and his days in ways he had long thought impossible. The canyon, once a place of mystery and caution, had become a space of growth, understanding, and possibility. John felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led him here, to this moment of connection and trust. And as night fell and the stars began to appear, he knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would change his life forever. In the following weeks, John and Ayana continued to meet, exploring the canyon, sharing meals, and learning from one another. Their bond deepened, not just through words, but through shared experiences, quiet moments, and the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. John realized that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with someone who truly understood him. By the time autumn approached, the rancher and the Apache girl had built a routine together. He would ride to the canyon in the mornings, spend hours with her exploring the terrain, learning new skills, and simply enjoying each other's company. Even the most ordinary tasks, gathering water, preparing meals, or tending to small chores, were transformed into moments of connection and joy. John knew that his life would never be the same. The solitude that had defined him for decades was gradually giving way to companionship, understanding, and the quiet excitement of a shared future. And in Ayana, he had found someone whose strength, wisdom, and honesty mirrored his own, creating a bond that was rare, precious, and deeply human. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, John and Ayana's relationship deepened. What had started as curiosity and fascination had grown into trust and companionship. Each day brought new experiences, challenges, and shared moments that strengthened the bond between them. The ranch, which had once been a place of lonely routines, now became a backdrop to the blossoming of a connection neither had expected to find. John's mornings began to carry a new energy. Where he once rode out to check cattle with only thoughts of chores in his mind, he now anticipated the moments he would spend with Ayana. He found himself scanning the horizon for the glimmer of her presence, whether she was tending to plants near the stream or observing the land with her keen, watchful eyes. The canyon and the plains had become a shared space, a world where their lives intertwined, and John felt more alive than he had in years. Ayana, too, embraced their growing partnership. She had lived much of her life in solitude, and at first the idea of sharing her days so fully with another person had seemed daunting. Yet in John, she found a companion who understood her independence and respected her strength. He did not seek to change her or confine her, and that freedom allowed her to open her heart to him. Together, they navigated the balance between closeness and independence, learning how to support one another while honoring their individual lives. Their days were filled with practical work and small adventures. John taught Ayana the ways of the ranch, how to check the cattle for signs of illness, how to mend fences efficiently, and how to manage the land to prevent erosion. She absorbed the lessons with enthusiasm, often surprising John with her natural skill and strength. In return, she introduced him to the hidden lessons of the canyon, the knowledge of edible plants, the ways to read weather signs in the clouds and soil, and how to move silently through the terrain to avoid disturbing wildlife. John marveled at her awareness, realizing that her life in the canyon had given her wisdom he could never have learned from books or practice alone. The partnership between them began to influence the ranch itself. John's careful management combined with Ayana's understanding of the land led to improvements that neither could have accomplished alone. Fences were repaired and reinforced, water sources were managed more efficiently, and crops planted near the edges of the canyon began to flourish. Even the cattle seemed to respond to their combined care, becoming calmer and healthier under the attention of two thoughtful keepers rather than one solitary rancher. As their physical work on the land progressed, their emotional connection flourished as well. They shared stories from their pasts, not only the hardships but also the small joys that had shaped their lives. John spoke of his childhood on the ranch, the early mornings spent with his father, and the nights lying under the stars, dreaming of a life he had not yet found. Yana shared memories of growing up near these lands, her experiences of being different in size and strength, and the lessons she had learned from living close to nature and relying on herself. Through these exchanges, they began to understand each other's fears, hopes, and dreams more intimately. One evening, as the sun began to sink behind the canyon walls, they sat together on a large boulder near the stream. The light painted the canyon in warm tones, and the gentle murmur of water created a peaceful rhythm around them. Iana turned to John, her expression thoughtful. "You have a gentle heart," she said. "I have met few who understand the value of quiet work, patience, and care. You see more than just what is on the surface. You see life itself. You have faced life in ways I cannot imagine, and yet you have chosen to share your days with me. That is a gift I will always treasure." Yet each time they spoke, the other listened with genuine understanding. The bond between them was built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect, a foundation stronger than either had known before. With the passing of time, John began to notice changes within himself. The quiet confidence that Ayana exuded inspired him to take more initiative on the ranch and in his personal life. He became more attentive, more patient, and more willing to embrace the unknown. Likewise, Yana found that John's steady presence gave her a sense of security and belonging she had never experienced in her solitary years. Together, they encouraged each other to grow not only in skill but in heart and spirit. Of course, their growing closeness was not without challenges. There were moments of doubt and hesitation. John occasionally wondered how others in the town or nearby ranches would perceive their relationship. Iana, who had lived so long free from judgment, sometimes worried about leaving the canyon and exposing herself to potential misunderstanding. Yet these concerns were always addressed openly. They spoke honestly about their fears, finding reassurance in the unwavering support of the other. Each challenge they faced together only strengthened their connection. One pivotal moment came when John suggested they work on a new project together, building a small shelter near the stream where they could store tools, take breaks, and simply enjoy the beauty of the canyon. Yana embraced the idea enthusiastically. They spent days gathering wood, measuring, and constructing the shelter. The work required cooperation, patience, and creativity, and it became a symbol of their partnership. By the time the shelter was finished, it stood not just as a practical structure, but as a testament to what they could accomplish together. Their bond was also expressed in the quiet, everyday moments. Sharing meals by the fire, tending to animals side by side, or simply sitting together watching the sun rise, these ordinary acts were infused with meaning. John noticed how much he had changed, how much joy he derived from these simple moments, and how deeply he valued Ayana's presence. She, too, reflected on the transformation in her own life, the comfort of companionship, the feeling of being understood, and the knowledge that she had a partner who respected her fully. As the seasons changed, their relationship continued to flourish. They celebrated small victories, like a particularly successful harvest, and supported each other through minor setbacks, like a fence that needed repair after a storm. Through every challenge and success, they learned to work as a team, relying on one another's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. The ranch, once a place of solitary labor for John, had become a shared canvas, a space where their combined efforts created something meaningful and enduring. The turning point in their emotional journey came one evening when they stood at the edge of the canyon, watching the sun set in brilliant hues of orange, pink, and gold. Yana spoke with quiet intensity, her voice carrying both vulnerability and strength. "John, I have lived a life of solitude and I have been strong because I had no choice. But now, I want to share my days, my life, and my dreams with you. I trust you with my heart. I cannot imagine a day without you. Whatever challenges we face, I want to face them with you. Your trust means more to me than words can say." They knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but they also understood that together, they could navigate any obstacle. From that day on, John and Ayana approached life with a shared purpose. They worked together on the ranch, cared for the animals, explored the canyon, and planned for the future. Their relationship was a living example of how two individuals, each shaped by solitude and challenge, could come together to create a life that was fuller, richer, and more meaningful than either could have imagined alone. Even when outsiders noticed their unusual pairing, John and Ayana remained steadfast. Rumors and whispers did not shake their resolve. They had built a bond that was unshakable, grounded not in appearances or societal expectations, but in understanding, shared experience, and mutual respect. Their story, though unusual, became a quiet legend in the area, a tale of trust, resilience, and the power of human connection. Through their shared days and nights, John and Ayana discovered that love was not just an emotion but an ongoing choice. It was in the daily acts of care, the laughter shared over small victories, the reassurance given during moments of doubt, and the unwavering presence of the other. They learned that true companionship required effort, patience, and honesty, but that the rewards were immeasurable. By the time summer arrived, their bond had become the foundation of a life neither had dared to dream of before. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude for John, now represented hope, growth, and shared purpose. Yana, too, found fulfillment in the partnership, knowing that her strength, wisdom, and independence were valued and respected. Together, they had created a life that was both practical and deeply meaningful, a life that honored the past while embracing the possibilities of the future. After months of growing closeness, John and Ayana's bond had become undeniable. The days they spent together were filled with laughter, work, and quiet companionship, and both had come to rely on the other in ways they had never imagined. John no longer felt the emptiness that had once defined his life. Ayana had shown him that even in the vast isolation of the plains and canyons, love and companionship could flourish. With the arrival of spring, a sense of renewal settled over the ranch. The grass grew greener, the streams ran clearer, and the land seemed to hum with life. John and Ayana decided it was time to take a step forward, not just emotionally but practically. They wanted to create a home together, a place where both their lives could grow side by side. The idea was both exciting and daunting. John knew the community might not understand their unusual relationship, and Ayana, though strong and independent, feared leaving the canyon that had been her home for so long. Nevertheless, their commitment to each other gave them courage. They began making plans to combine their lives fully. John worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch for Ayana, repairing old fences, painting walls, and planting flowers to welcome her. He wanted the home they shared to reflect the care and thoughtfulness he felt toward her. Meanwhile, Ayanna contributed her knowledge of the land, teaching John how to cultivate different plants, how to read the soil and water sources, and how to plan for seasons of growth. Together, they transformed the ranch into a vibrant, living space that reflected both their strengths. As they worked, their emotional connection deepened even further. They spoke openly about their fears, hopes, and dreams. John admitted how long he had felt lonely, how the emptiness of the ranch had sometimes weighed on him like a shadow. Iana shared her fears about leaving the canyon and stepping into a world that might not fully accept her. But with every conversation, every shared task, they discovered trust and reassurance in one another. They learned to support each other not only through work but through the vulnerabilities of their hearts. One afternoon, as they worked together in the fields, planting rows of crops, Ayana stopped and looked at John. "Do you see what we are building?" she asked. "Not just the land, but this life. We are planting seeds, literally and metaphorically. This is our future." The work was hard, but it was fulfilling, and it brought a sense of unity neither had experienced before. Over time, neighbors and townspeople began to notice the changes at the ranch. At first, there were whispers and curious glances. Some were skeptical of the unusual partnership, while others were intrigued by the transformation of the land. John and Ayana faced judgment quietly, without complaint, choosing to focus on the life they were creating together. Their bond was stronger than rumors or misunderstandings. They had found something rare, an understanding and companionship that did not need validation from the outside world. Evenings were their favorite time. After long days of work, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon and listening to the wind move through the fields. Sometimes they spoke about the past, reflecting on the lives they had lived before finding each other. Other times they dreamed about the future, imagining a family, a thriving ranch, and a life filled with love and laughter. The quiet moments were just as meaningful as the busy ones. They had learned to cherish each other's presence without needing constant words, understanding that true companionship was as much about being together in silence as it was about sharing thoughts. The seasons passed, and the ranch flourished. The crops grew strong, the animals thrived, and the house felt alive with warmth and care. John noticed how much more confident and joyful Ayana had become, how her laughter filled the space in ways it never had before. In turn, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was no longer alone and that he could rely on someone who truly understood him. Their partnership had turned the ranch into more than just land. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of resilience and love. One spring morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky, John and Ayana stood together in the fields, looking at the rows of newly sprouted plants. Ayana reached for John's hand and held it firmly. "Look at this," she said softly. "All this started with care, attention, and trust, just like us." It was a quiet victory, but one that filled their hearts with immense satisfaction. In the months that followed, their lives became a testament to partnership, trust, and the power of shared dreams. They worked side by side, supported each other through challenges, and celebrated victories both small and large. John marveled at how Ayana's wisdom and strength complemented his own skills and knowledge. She taught him to see the land differently, to appreciate its nuances, and to understand that growth, whether in crops or in life, required patience, care, and commitment. Gianna, too, found joy in the life they had built together. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, was now vibrant and alive. She had discovered a home where she was accepted fully, not for what she was expected to be, but for who she truly was. The quiet, strong presence of John gave her a sense of stability and connection she had longed for without realizing it. Together, they had created a partnership built on equality, respect, and love. Neighbors slowly came to accept them. Some remained curious, others respectful, but all began to see the ranch as a place of harmony and productivity. Rumors faded as the visible evidence of their teamwork became undeniable. They were not simply surviving, they were thriving together, and in a way that inspired quiet admiration. The couple also made time for simple pleasures. They explored the nearby hills, fished in the streams, and sometimes spent evenings telling stories under the stars. These moments strengthened their bond and reminded them of the importance of connection, not just to each other, but to the land and the world around them. John realized that life's greatest rewards were often found in these quiet, shared experiences, rather than in grand gestures or distant ambitions. As another year passed, John and Ayana planted a small orchard near the edge of the ranch. They carefully selected saplings, nurturing them with attention and care. The act of planting trees symbolized more than food. It represented stability, longevity, and the life they intended to grow together. Each new branch and leaf became a living reminder of their partnership, a visible sign of their commitment to one another. One evening, after a long day of planting and tending to the land, they sat together under the largest oak tree, watching the golden light fade into a sky filled with stars. Yana rested her head on John's shoulder, and for the first time in decades, he felt completely at peace. "We've done something special," she whispered. "Not just the ranch, but us. Look at what we've grown together." And in Ayana, he had found a partner, a confidant and a friend who had changed his life in ways he had never imagined possible. As the night settled over the plains, the wind carried the scent of earth and growing plants. The ranch, alive with the work of their hands and hearts, seemed to breathe alongside them. John and Ayana knew that challenges would continue to come, the weather, the work, and the opinions of others, but they were ready to face them together. They had learned that the strength of their bond could withstand difficulties, and that love, trust, and shared purpose could create a life richer than either had ever dreamed. In the quiet of the night, with stars scattered like jewels across the sky, John thought about how far they had come. From lonely isolation to companionship, from fear of judgment to pride in their shared life, their journey had been transformative. And as he held Ayana's hand, he knew that the life they were building was just beginning. Together, they would continue planting seeds of crops, of trees, and of love that would grow strong and endure for years to come.